Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Davey Peppers, spooky, scary skeletons, and happy Halloween, happy October, happy the best month of the year and the best season, spooky month, which is about to come to a horrific and bitter close as we walk into the far less cinematically interesting holiday and season that is Thanksgiving. But as it is the last show that I am recording in this most precious of months, I am going to do 4 double feature ideas for you so that you can maybe keep the Halloween spirit alive just a little bit longer. So we are going to do these 4 pieces on 4 double features of movies that I have been meaning to watch that are horror or horror adjacent, and just giving you my thoughts, and hopefully there can be some recommendations for something that you've either missed out or just haven't gotten a chance to see for yourself, and hopefully we can find some really cool stuff. So we are going to start with a double feature that I like to call the independent movies that I didn't know where to put in other categories. So, this double feature is the 2011 film The Innkeepers, written and directed by indie filmmaker Ty West, starring Sarah Paxton and Pat Healy, and the second film is The Endless, an indie science fiction horror film directed, written, produced by, and starring Justin Benson and Aaron Morehead. So, starting with The Innkeepers, Ty West is probably most known for being generally in the same circles as people like Adam Wingard. I mentioned the general mumblecore horror side of things previously when talking about the film The Rental, and Ty West is very much in that same vein, in that same general community, as it were. His debut feature, The House of the Devil, or not his debut, but the feature that really put him on the map was The House of the Devil in 2009, which was a big independent kind of smash hit. Then he made The Innkeepers, which we are going to talk about. He also directed Cabin Fever 2 for direct-to-video, but I'm not going to really count that because I don't want to watch Cabin Fever 2 because I watched Cabin Fever 1 and it's terrible. He contributed to the horror anthologies VHS and the ABCs of Death. He made In a Valley of Violence, a Western in 2016, and the film of his that I had seen before now that made me really want to watch The Innkeepers is 2013's The Sacrament, a found footage cult horror, cult in it is about a cult, not that it is a cult film, although I guess it probably qualifies for that as well, but it's about a group of documentarians who try and locate one of their sisters as she is kind of getting sucked into a cult, and it's based on the Jonestown Massacre, and it's a really good movie. I think that movie is kind of fantastic. The Innkeepers, his previous film, I would say is not as fantastic. It's a much slower burn than The Sacrament is, and by virtue of it being a smaller budget and generally more serious endeavor, it doesn't have the same level of kind of schlocky fun that I find in The Sacrament, but not to say that The Innkeepers doesn't have a lot of things going for it. The biggest thing is the atmosphere, because it takes place at the real-life Yankee Peddler Inn following two employees at the inn where in its last weekend before its fictional closing, they're like, hey, so this inn's supposedly haunted. We like ghosts and general hauntings, so let's try and figure out if there are any ghosts here and see what's going on. And a lot of the movie rests on the shoulders of Sarah Paxton and Pat Healy, who later would work together in the just incredible comedy thriller Cheap Thrills, which is another movie that you should absolutely check out if you can. I think it's still on Netflix. That movie rules. But Paxton and Healy are really just the core of this movie, and they have to hold so much of it together because, like a lot of independent horror and like a lot of slower burn horror, the biggest issue with The Innkeepers is that it's 100 minutes long and over an hour of it is mostly just a traditional drama. And as a traditional drama, it doesn't fail. I like these characters and I like what's going on with them, but it is so clearly tuned towards the eventual kind of third act horror explosion that you come to expect with this sort of film that it's hard to get invested. At least I find it hard to get invested in the drama straight without saying, okay, cool, but like when are we gonna get the spooky things going on? And there are a lot of really clever kind of breadcrumbs of horror that are placed throughout here. However, unlike a movie like The Sacrament, I think the weirdness of that film can carry the drama through a little bit more. I think with The Innkeepers, it doesn't have that strange pulpiness that makes that film so successful to me, honestly. And when watching The Innkeepers, because this is a movie that I've been meaning to watch since it came out, since 2011, and finally getting a chance to sit down and watch it, it is a handsomely directed, well-acted, creepy and atmospheric movie that just did not totally stick the landing for me, unfortunately. Not to say that it's not a good movie and that it's not worth watching, because it is, and it is, but I was definitely expecting something a little bit more, I should say. Now, the second film of this double feature, The Endless, was the exact opposite of that for me, because this movie rules. So, Justin Benson and Aaron Morehead are two independent filmmakers who really burst onto the scene in 2012 with their film Resolution, which I watched in 2012 and said, I don't think I get this, and I didn't, and I still need to rewatch it. They also made the film Spring, which a lot of people love, and Synchronic, which just came out in theaters, and everyone that I have spoken to that has seen it has said that the movie is incredible. And so I said, you know what, I want to watch a movie by these guys. They're independent directors. I can kind of tie this into The Innkeepers and make a segment about it. So I watched The Endless. And this movie, the reason that I brought up The Sacrament so much when talking about The Innkeepers is that would have probably been a better double feature to The Endless. Because this movie follows Benson and Morehead playing two brothers who have 10 years prior escaped from a UFO death cult, and they haven't really figured out their lives since leaving this commune. And so one of them, the one played by Aaron, says, hey, I want to go back there and I want to figure out what was going on and why I was so much happier there than I am here, basically in the real world. Justin is not a fan of this, but he goes along with him anyway because it's his younger brother. Yada, yada, yada. They are getting reintroduced into this cult and trying to figure out and see what in the absolute hell is going on and why, A, these people aren't dead, and B, they don't seem to have aged since they last saw them 10 years ago. And The Endless is also a slower burn. It takes around the same amount of time as The Innkeepers to get going and to really start getting into the weirdness. But the difference between this movie and The Innkeepers is that the high level of strangeness going on from minute one is captivating enough to keep the drama strong, at least for me. And watching these characters kind of awkwardly stumble around each other and figure out what they're even doing and what they're wanting, and if they were wrong 10 years prior, is just, it's delicious. Benson and Morehead aren't the best actors in the world, but they are really strong. They're really strong writers, and they are incredibly clever directors who have done a lot of great work with a very small budget to make a honestly very powerful and kind of thrilling question mark that is hanging above the audience and the characters' heads the entire time, saying, okay, cool, but like, what's actually going on here? Like, what is this? What is happening here? The movie is a bit of a pseudo sequel to their 2012 film Resolution, which just makes me want to rewatch that even more. But I will say, you don't need to watch that to watch The Endless. You can jump into this right away. It's on Netflix right now. I highly, highly recommend it. So, as a double feature, The Innkeepers and The Endless, definitely the biggest stretch of a double feature that we have in this episode, but I wanted to start with it because it is probably the two films that are the most obscure, I should say, or at least neither of them have at least one film that is somewhat notable. I don't think The Innkeepers and The Endless make a very good double feature, I will say. I do think The Sacrament and The Endless would make a great double feature, though. So that's on me for having watched The Sacrament 7 years ago and not holding off on that so that I could talk about it now in the end of 2020. But if you're looking for some camp, some cults, and some really spectacular climaxes, The Sacrament by Ty West and The Endless by Justin Benson and Aaron Morehead is about as good of a cult double feature as you can get, presuming that you've already seen Midsummer and the original Wicker Man. And these films really help showcase, both of them, The Innkeepers and The Endless, really showcase just how good independent horror can really be, because you do get a lot of movies that are very slow and really cheesy and bad and never really know what to do with their runtime and kind of tease the audience along. You get a lot of the Paranormal Activity movies that just, while some of them are quite fun, and I do legitimately kind of love the third one, they just kind of meander and sit and never really commit to the horror and to the big punches that they give in the final 3 minutes of the movie. But when you get people that know their budgetary restrictions and know exactly what they want to do, like Ty West in The Innkeepers and in The Sacrament, even though I'm not crazy about The Innkeepers, it's still a movie that knows exactly what it's doing, and in The Endless, there is so much that you can do with a camera with some old school Hitchcockian tricks of the lens and just make something tense and invigorating and new. And that's the biggest thing that I would use to describe a film like The Endless, is it feels new. I see the pieces, I see where various inspirations come in, and none of the ideas on their own are entirely crafted from thin air, because nothing is truly original. But the combination of them all together and the way that it's done with such craft and such dread is magnificent. So yeah, my recommendation for a double feature would be Ty West's The Sacrament and Benson and Morehead's The Endless. So if you'll stick around, we have 3 more of these things coming up. We are going to do a witchy double feature of Halloween 3 and The Craft. We are going to do a Grief Makes Weird Things Happen double feature with Possession and Don't Look Now. And then we are going to do a horror musical double feature at the end with Phantom of the Paradise and The Lure. So I'm very excited to share all of these weird discoveries and exciting connective tissues with you all. So stick around, and we are going to get to that, and I am oh so very excited.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
And let us continue. So as I mentioned at the end of the previous segment, we are continuing on with the double features. So the second double feature that I wanted to bring up today is cult witchy films. And this is cult like cult film, not cult like Midsummer. We need a new word for these type of movies because it just, words are confusing and the English language is bad. That's what we've learned today, if we've learned anything. So the first movie that we are discussing is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, that is written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace and is the only movie in the Halloween franchise to have absolutely nothing to do with Michael Myers. And that was intentional. What creators of the series, Deborah Hill and John Carpenter, wanted to do was to, after Halloween and Halloween 2, turn the Halloween franchise into a sort of anthology series where people would come knowing, hey, we're getting a Halloween spooky movie, and kind of see what happens and see what various creators have come up with. It didn't work. People did not like this movie at all. They kind of hated it. And it didn't make a ton of money. Like, it did okay, but it was a far cry from the first two films. And so they abandoned the idea, and for the sequels went directly back into Michael Myers territory, and we never looked back, and we never got a good one until 2018. So thanks Danny McBride for co-writing the second good Michael Myers movie. I don't know how you did it, and that's still a weird sentence, but thanks for that. And yes, that does mean that Halloween 2 is not a good movie. It's not a good movie. Either Halloween 2. Rob Zombie sucks. What was I talking about? I was talking about Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, which, in addition to making me think of that Donovan song that was in the teaser trailer for Paranorman, which is a song I still love to this day, is a science fiction horror film about a company called Silver Shamrock that is producing a lot of Halloween masks for kids. There's a huge, marketing push, and they have the song. It's the 8 more days till Halloween, 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 8 more days till Halloween, Silver Shamrock, which apparently is a thing that a lot of horror fans still like to sing, and now I'm one of them. But the plan is, hey, kids are gonna put these masks on, and then it's gonna kill them, and get rid of all the children, and just, they turn them into basically a swarm of snakes and bugs that kill people. It's confusing and not a very great plan, but it's using the magic power of Stonehenge and technology to kill children and turn them into carriers for evil bugs. It's a very stupid movie. I'm going to say that up front. This is a very dumb movie. Using the magic of Stonehenge alone is just a bonkers idea, and it's kind of awesome. It's not very good. It's a very, very silly movie, and it doesn't ramp up until the very end, which is a theme you're going to probably hear a lot, but it is a ton of fun. And it makes me really wish that the Halloween films had continued on this more anthology like this anthology series, like various films about the night of Halloween and different creepy, weird, kooky things that could happen. And especially knowing how poorly the Halloween series did after this point in terms of like making quality films and just all of these run-of-the-mill slashers, I am really disappointed that this movie didn't take off more. I know that anthologies are hard to do, and and a lot of people felt kind of duped by this not being another Michael Myers story. But this movie is so weird and silly and just kind of a blast to watch, even though it is legitimately not very good. And it just really makes me wish that we had more experiments like this. And it makes me really happy that this has had a bit of a following in the years since, and that there are people who still sing the Silver Shamrock song, because there is a lot of creative and weird and ballsy ideas in this movie, and I want more horror films like that, especially from the 80s. It reminds me of maybe my favorite, like, Z-grade slasher, which is a movie called Chopping Mall, where a group of students in a shopping mall that they're trapped in it because they stayed overnight, and the robot security system that has recently been built goes haywire and kills everyone. And it's awesome. It's on Amazon Prime. It rules. It's so stupid. It's great. I love it. And I want more movies with that energy. I want more movies that just kind of throw caution and sense to the wind and just say, hey, we just want to make people die from the magic of Stonehenge, and that is okay. And it is okay. Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, I would never recommend to anyone wanting a serious horror film. And this double feature is not about serious movies at all. But this is a ton of fun if you like the campier and the stupider horror. Another film that really works if you're into camp is The Craft, a 1996 supernatural horror film directed by Andrew Fleming, written by Fleming and Peter Filardi. So, The Craft is a bit of a minor classic at this point. It did very, very well in theaters and got mixed reviews, but in the 25 years since, it has started to really grow in popularity and notoriety. And I think a lot of that is because, A, PG-13 teen movie in a time where a lot of these movies were doing very well and getting a big audience, and also that it is for women, and it has a lot of ideas about feminism and the power that young women can have when they stick together, which was very resonant with a lot of audiences in the late 90s and has continued its resonance to this very day. So this movie follows a young woman named Sarah who moves to a new town and gets involved with a small coven of witches, and the four of them say, hey, we got witch powers, we're gonna make our lives awesome and just get whatever we want from anybody. And they start to do that, and then a couple of them, especially one, Nancy, played by Fairuza Balk, say, hey, what about if we went evil and tried to take all of the power? If you've seen Chronicle, which is a movie that I love so dearly, but if you've seen Chronicle, this is that movie. And that's totally fine. I like Chronicle, and I like this. I like stories about high schoolers gaining power, spending half of the movie just kind of hanging around and using the power for their own selfish, stupid gains, and then slowly going dark. I remember Project Almanac from, I think, 2015 tried to do the same thing, and even though I do kind of have a soft spot for that movie, it didn't work. It didn't hit the nail on the head. But when a movie like this works, it is an absolute blast, and The Craft is a blast. It is campy, and it is silly, but I would argue that it is In contrast to Halloween 3, a legitimately pretty fun and well-crafted movie, pun supremely intended. It doesn't get as much mileage out of trying to deal with the much, darker and serious themes that it tries to tackle in its second half, stuff like self-harm or assault. It doesn't really stick the landing on those super sensitive and heady topics, but the whole movie has this air of camp and kind of melodrama to its horror and to its supernatural elements that I think it gets away with a slight oversimplification of some of these much bigger and more serious ideas. And I think a lot of that comes down to the performances. Robin Tunney as Sarah is a really good center. She doesn't get remembered terribly much for this performance just because she is the audience avatar and therefore kind of the least interesting character. But Fairuza Balk as Nancy, as the eventual antagonist, kind of loose cannon of the group, is destroying the scenery any chance she gets. She's having a ton of fun. And also Nev Campbell and Rachel True, as the two other members of the four-person coven, are just bringing this whole world that is created to light. And the movie is just a ton of fun. I was expecting kind of a low-rent Heathers knockoff that would have been fine. And I would have gone, I get why people like it, but it's okay, I guess. And I was honestly really surprised at how much I had a legitimate great time with this movie. It has its flaws. It's stupid and it's silly, but much like how Chronicle really spoke to me when I was 14 and got to see it, this is that movie for young women, or one of these movies. And I love these darker teen films that really try and find that balance between, oh, this is fun and we're invincible, and oh, we're not. Obviously, the linchpin of this is Heathers. Recently, the movie Spontaneous did a very similar thing, and again, everyone has to watch Spontaneous. It's so good. Please watch that movie. But this is right up there with them. It's not one that I'm going to rewatch time and time again, but if I see it on, I am not going to complain one bit. The Craft is a rubbery, silly movie, and I absolutely had a blast with it. So while I will say that there is a great double feature with Chronicle and The Craft, the double feature of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch and The Craft honestly really works, because both of them have the really high camp energy to what they're doing, and it's easy to see what is going, why these movies have found audiences in the years since their release. Sure, The Craft was a success at launch and Halloween 3 wasn't, but both of these movies are still being discussed in various ways. Halloween 3, there are a ton of people who love it, and The Craft got a sequel that just came out, and I plan on discussing soon. These movies that resonate with people in weird and unconventional ways, you get it. You know? At least I do. I see the connective tissue, and I see why it means so much to so many people. Obviously, I would say I get why people love The Craft more than I get why people love Halloween 3, but both of these movies, I do not regret my time with them. I do not regret sitting down to watch them, and I don't regret talking about them on this show and talking about them in this episode. There are only so many movies that you can watch in a month, obviously, and there are obviously only so many Halloween movies you can have for the week of Halloween viewing. And while neither The Craft nor Halloween 3 are in the top tier of Halloween surprises that I've had even this year, as a bit of a palate cleanser from a lot of much darker and more self-serious movies, this is good. This is good stuff. If you never got around to watching The Craft or just haven't seen it in a long time, maybe pick it up again, because I found it to be a lot stronger and a lot smarter than I gave it credit for. So kudos to that, and I really hope that the Craft Legacy doesn't absolutely throw my happiness into the ground, but we will see about that soon. So now, if you will continue on this little journey with me, we are going to next do a double feature of grief and sadness movies with Possession and Don't Look Now. So stick around for that, and then we're going to do some musicals. Get hyped.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are still going, so the third double feature that we are going to be taking a look at today is what I call the Grief Sucks double feature. And the first film that we are discussing is Don't Look Now, a 1973 film directed by Nicholas Roeg, starring Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie. The second film we are talking about is the 1981 film Possession, starring Isabelle Adjani and Sam Neill, directed by Polish. Andrzej. Andrzej, Z with a little dot on top of it, UL with a line through it, AWSKI. Wikipedia says Andrzej Zawadzki, which I'm sure I am getting very wrong, and if anyone who is Polish is listening to this, first off, I'm sorry. Second off, your country makes wonderful films, and we're going to be talking about another Polish film later, so I'm going to keep butchering names, and I am still sorry about that. The first film, Don't Look Now, follows Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland as a married couple, Laura and John, who after their daughter dies in a random drowning accident, go to Venice for a bit. John, Donald Sutherland, he took a job to help restore an old church, and Laura, Julie Christie, while there, has an encounter with two sisters, one of whom is blind and clairvoyant, and is like, hey, I can speak to the dead, I can speak to your daughter, she's trying to contact you, let's work something out. John is dismissive of this, and the bulk of the film follows their relationship starting to fracture and fall apart as Laura is very into this possibility of holding on and continuing to communicate with her daughter, where John is, in addition to not believing in the occult and the afterlife, is very much in the path of, let's just try and get over it and move on. We still have a son, we still have a family, and we still have a marriage to try and take care of. Let's focus on that and try and move past the trauma. It leans head forward in a very respectable way into a lot of the really horrible things about having a child pass, and it has a lot of things that are clearly a great inspiration on a lot of the defining horror films that are coming out nowadays. Films like Hereditary and The Babadook and Goodnight Mommy, films that have a lot to do with loss and the fear of loss, specifically in relation to deaths of children, and how the grief and the sort of pain and trauma of that, it can be far scarier than any actual death or murder or anything somewhat supernatural. Possession follows an international spy played by Sam Neill and his wife, played by Isabelle Adjani, who, after she says, hey, I would like to have a divorce, starts to slowly exhibit completely banana pants behavior. And it's about the two of them trying to deal with her erratic behavior, the erratic behavior that he is starting to exhibit, and basically not knowing what is going on. It's not a terribly plot-heavy film, I would say. It's much more of a thematic tonal piece. But also doing a similar thing to Don't Look Now, where the scariest thing to these characters is not the fear of the unknown. It is not the potential for severe trauma or severe tragedy. It is that relationships are falling apart, and that absolutely sucks and makes people do difficult and scary and erratic and violent things to try and salvage it in any way that they can, or to just find some sort of carnal respite from the stress that they are currently under. Both of these films are somewhat hard to talk about because their joys and their successes really come as surprises and as the tension ramps up in a very natural and honest way. However, the thing that I can say with absolute certainty is that Don't Look Now underwhelmed me, and Possession blew my frickin' socks off. And I think that's in basically every way possible. This is the first film I've seen by both of these directors. I've never seen a Rogue film before, but I would like to, because he's generally considered an extremely important and pretty beloved director. And this is also the first film I've seen by Zawofsky, who also is extremely well regarded, and both of these films are have a very clear inspiration from their release to the way that psychological horror and more realistic horror dramas are structured nowadays, and how they work. I can see a lot of kind of the trickling down from these two films into the sort of stories that really excite and inspire and affect a lot of people. That said, I think the thing that makes Possession work for me as much as its more modern counterparts, if not more, and what makes Don't Look Now less successful to me, is that I feel like Don't Look Now is trying really hard to not be a horror film, and Possession says, alright, cool, we got like 20 minutes in this 2-hour film that's just like a normal drama. We're gonna go crazy now? Okay, cool, we're gonna go absolutely insane and have some of the most stressful sequences of emotional turmoil that I have ever seen. Just in terms of the camera and the performances alone, it is exceptional. Isabelle Adjani, oh my god. The way that she performs this character and performs these erratic behaviors with an absolute burning forest of pain behind her eyes it's impossible to look away from the screen. And looking to Don't Look Now, Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland are both doing pretty good jobs here. They are giving solid, nuanced, and respectable performances, but neither of them are commanding the screen nearly as well as Adjani and Neill are in Possession. And I suppose it is somewhat unfair to, in the case of this double feature, tie these movies so closely together and compare them to one another, but I do feel like they are trying to do very similar things in different ways and with a different level of reverence and understanding for the beauty and the majesty and the uncomfortability of the horror genre. Don't Look Now is very much a 70s classical horror movie. It is slow and it is morose and it is trying its hardest to kind of sweep the more supernatural and shocking and horrific elements under the rug to pull them out at the very end. It's very reminiscent of Hitchcock, which is somewhat fitting because it's based on a story by Daphne du Maurier, who wrote the original story, or the original novel of Rebecca, which the Hitchcock film was based on. So it has a lot of those similar blood tying it to these more reserved and more, I should say, generally subtle films. And that's not even necessarily a bad thing, but I think that tension of the striking, dizzying imagery and the beautiful editing and a lot of the more explicit and kind of attention-grabbing moments of this film, like the infamous sex scene, which was a really big piece of controversy at the time because it was so much more explicit than almost anything else that was released in mainstream cinema. That stuff is at odds with the much more reserved and quieter and simpler aspects of the relationship drama. And I understand that this is a me thing, and that a lot of people absolutely adore Don't Look Now, and I get why. It is a well-made movie that is powerful and earnest and honest, and that is a great thing, and I respect it so much. But I don't know if I particularly liked it. As a viewing experience, nothing about it grabbed me in a way that I had not been grabbed far better by films before and since. And I'm sure that were I to watch it in the original 1973 release, I probably would have liked it a great deal more. But I fear and I feel like Don't Look Now is one of those movies that created a great personality around itself and inspired a lot of people to build on it. And because of that, it is hard to go back to it and see it with the same exceptional reverence that it had earned on its release. And that's a sad feeling. I bought the Criterion of this movie a long time ago because I like horror movies and I like classic movies and I like things that people tell me are great usually. But as I was watching it, I just felt myself wishing that I could just skip ahead and start watching Possession because maybe I would have liked that more. And I did. I liked it a lot more. I'm still parsing Possession. There are a lot of images and moments, especially in the second half of the film, that are hard for me to fully wrap my head around. But it is stuck in my brain. And it is not leaving. It is over just a couple of days since I watched it. It has just weaseled and slithered its way into my skull and coiled itself around me. This is an exceptional psychological horror film. And it's clearly also done a lot of inspiring on its own. Just by name recognition alone, the recent film Possessor clearly takes some inspiration from this film. But whereas Don't Look Now felt like a relic of the past, Possession feels as vital and electric now than I presume that it did in 1981. It seems an absolute tragedy that it was originally released in a less than 90-minute cut in the United States, because I couldn't think of a minute of this movie that should have been shaved off. It is bold and bizarre and horrifying in every definition of the word, and it is tied with An American Werewolf in London for the best film that I have seen in these little double features of horror films that I've been watching in preparation for Halloween. Does this work as a double feature? I'd say yes. I know a lot of people that love Don't Look Now, and I know a lot of people that love Possession. I think odds are you will probably find a lot to enjoy about one of these films, and I think they do complement each other nicely in the different ways that they approach very similar topics, and in the different ways they approach horror as a concept to even be grappled with. So yeah, Don't Look Now and Possession make a pretty great double feature, and if you are interested in these films, I would recommend sitting down, maybe calling your loved ones first and just telling them that you love them, and maybe to call you again in 4 hours once you've sat through 2 extremely bleak movies. But I do think this works as companion pieces to one another. Clearly, Possession I do think is the far superior film. And I was thinking about it before recording if there was something else I would rather recommend to connect to Possession, maybe something like Hereditary. But no, I think the beauty of the double feature is the comparing and the contrasting. And I don't find a lot of joy in watching a movie and then immediately watching the thing that the first film inspired, I should say. I like finding the stranger connective tissues between films. So I would say Don't Look Now and Possession is probably the most liberating and exhilarating double feature I have had so far this Halloween season. And neither film are bad, I should say. So yes, I would recommend that most, and that is both on, not necessarily on an entertainment level, but on an academic level, it is my personal favorite of the double features that we will be covering. Now, if you'll stick around, we are going to do one final double feature before I send you off on your way. And we will be discussing horror musicals with Phantom of the Paradise and The Lure. And I'm very excited for how weird that is going to get. So stick around, and we will get to that shortly.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
And now we'll go to the part of the episode that I am the most excited for, 'cause I love musical theater a whole lot. I am not going to torture you by singing the entire 15-minute segment, although I want you to know that I very, very much want to. The final of the double features for my little Halloween mini marathon is musical horror, with 1974's Phantom of the Paradise, written and directed by Brian De Palma, with songs by and starring Paul Williams. And the second film is The Lure, a 2015 Polish horror musical directed by oh my god. Directed by Agnieszka Smoskienska. I am so incredibly sorry. Directed by this person, based on the Hans Christian Andersen version of The Little Mermaid. So this isn't Disney. This is Grimm's Fairy Tales. I know it's not actually by the Brothers Grimm, but it's that general idea of, bad things happening and blood and violence. The first film, Phantom of the Paradise, is adapted from and inspired by 3 classic works. The Phantom of the Opera, the original novel and play and film, Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, and the story Faust. William Finley stars as Winslow Leach, a aspiring songwriter who has just written a rock opera version of the story Faust, the famous story of a man who sells his soul to the devil for great success, when he is noticed by Swan, played by Paul Williams, who also offers the singing voice of Winslow Leach. And Swan says, "Hey, I will put on your show. All you have to do is sit in this room and write, because you are disfigured now, and this way I can basically keep you working for as long as you're alive," which is a long, long time, because Faustian bargains tend to do things like that. So it's got that element to it. It's got a lot of Phantom of the Opera, where there's a young woman who is performing the show, and Winslow is like, I want to write the best musical possible for her to perform, but also I want her to not be trapped into this world of chaos and black magic like I am, etc., etc., etc. It's called Phantom of the Paradise. It's doing a lot of Phantom of the Opera stuff, which is much more interesting, knowing that it came out before the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical of Phantom of the Opera really popularized the story and kind of ruined it a little bit, because I do not think Andrew Lloyd Webber is a good writer, but we will not ever get to that, because this is not a musical theater podcast, although I would kill a musical theater podcast. Being written and directed by Brian De Palma automatically means that this is a very weird film, and it's in his 70s era when he was doing stuff like Carrie, right before he was doing stuff like Blowout and Dressed to Kill, so it's got a lot of very kind of out there cinematic techniques. It's very garish and very bold in its filmmaking styles, and unlike his 80s work, I generally really like the stuff here. He doesn't use as much... I mean, he still uses some split screen and split diopter shots, which I think are maybe the ugliest cinematic technique in the history of the medium. I think they are disgusting to look at. But he is nowhere near as prevalent with them as he would be in his work in the 80s and beyond. With that restraint, or I guess that lack of falling in love with this technique as much, what De Palma has in this film is just a lot of energy and a lot of excitement, I should say. And that excitement kind of runs through the film and really carries it. It makes it, while a lot of the music in the film is diegetic, which can be kind of annoying for people that love musicals, that most of the songs are performed in universe, I should say, there is still that high fantasy element to it, and I think a lot of that comes through with the horror and the more sinister supernatural elements of the story to give a semblance of the high that I get while watching musicals, this kind of otherworldly transportation into something greater than we have, and something more like life feels than life is. And that's the thing that I love so much about movies and what they can do, and that's why I love musicals so very, very much. I will say, as a small tangent, there are a couple other horror musicals, but Phantom of the Paradise and The Lure were the last two notable ones that I had not seen, and I wanted these double features to be films that I was experiencing for the first time. So if you've never seen the 1986 Frank Oz directed Little Shop of Horrors, it's fantastic. Like one of the all-time great films, I would say. Also, there is a Scottish zombie musical set at Christmas called Anna and the Apocalypse, which I believe is on Hulu. You should watch that as well. And there's also an independent slasher musical called Stage Fright, which I'm not crazy about. I don't think it's generally very good, but it's a horror musical, so I can't hate it too much. And also, I want more things like this that blend genres together in weird and surprising and bizarre ways. And you can also, I guess, say Phantom of the Opera and Sweeney Todd. Sweeney Todd a little more so, but even then, they're much more gothic than properly, not even scary, but having those proper horror elements in their storytelling and in their structure. Which is what I like. I like the spooks, and I like the songs. And Phantom of the Paradise, for all of its flaws and all of its much more diegetic ways of crafting music, feeling sometimes more like a concert film than a proper movie musical, is still a ton of fun. It's one of the De Palma films that I've really liked. I don't generally like him as a director very much. And I think because of a lot of the techniques that he uses as he gets farther and farther into the 80s and beyond. So this film, much like with the film version of Carrie that he made, I like what he's doing here more. I find it just more visually interesting and more pleasant to look at, and more, I find the transmission of the energy from him to me to be a lot more successful. So Phantom of the Paradise, that's a good movie right there. I like it a great deal. And now let's move on to The Lure. I have so many thoughts about this movie. It got mixed to positive reviews on release, and I know some people that swear by it as being great, and I know some people that just really do not like it at all. So I was a little worried walking into this film, which follows the lives of these two mermaids. It's in the 80s in Poland. Their names are Golden and Silver, because of course they are. And a entertainment venue / strip club notices them and says, hey, you guys have beautiful singing voices. Do you want to sing and perform in this club? And they say, yeah, sure, absolutely. And most of this film just centers around that general idea, is these two young women, mermaids, that are coming to terms with their hunger and lust for flesh as monsters. Because these are like classical mermaids. These are sharp teeth, will kill a human being and rip out their heart and eat it kind of mermaids. This is not fun. The movie's a great deal of fun, but these mermaids are not nice. They are beasts of the sea that usually exist to lure men using their sexuality and then brutally murder them. So actually, no, that is fun. I like that. I think that's very fun. So forget what I said. But a lot of it is the conflict between their lust for flesh as mermaids and their lust for flesh as women. You see what I did there? I think that was funny. And then it slowly starts to follow the original story a little bit more, where one of the mermaids, the generally more pacifist and somewhat naive one, Silver, falls in love with one of the accompanists for their musical act and starts to try a relationship with him, only for him to say, yeah, no, like we can fool around and do stuff, but you will always be a fish and not a human. And so Silver starts to put things in progress to, as the story says, give up her tail and lose her voice in return. The thing about The Lure that is so fantastically exciting is just how far it goes with the original story. With the popularity of the Disney version and general ideas of mermaids as, I would argue, the most wholesome of the kind of classic mythological beasts at this point, seeing a movie that really leans hard into the grossness and the gore and the ferociousness within these creatures as they were originally written and as they are portrayed in this film is so much fun. It's so fun and so so weird. It is a extremely gory movie, I will say, for a movie where characters will just burst out into songs. And while there are a lot of songs that are diegetic because it follows a musical group, to this movie's credit, there are a lot of sequences that are pure fantasy where it goes into the much more elaborate and metaphorical musical sequences that are the staples of the genre that I personally really, really like. There's one song that takes place inside of an underwater world that is inside of a bathtub. There is a song that takes place while a couple characters are unconscious and they start singing, and it is, it's like candy to me. Another very exciting thing about this is that, this is a movie in Polish, and I have never seen a musical not in English before, and I didn't know how that would work for me, and that was one of the big reasons why I had put off watching this movie for so long, was because I didn't know if I could really appreciate the music and the environments and all of those things about musical filmmaking that I love so much, with it not being in English. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that, no, this still totally works. It still has that same excitement and electric energy in just the camera movements and in the performances that go full in to the horrific and campy nature of this story, because it has like those neon lights and those strong personalities and a lot of people figuring out what it means to exist, because that's the staple of a lot of stories that are set in the 80s as culture changes across the world. This is a messy, silly, somewhat unpolished Polish movie. There's another joke for you. But I had such a great time watching this film and watching these characters and knowing what was going to happen, because I know this story and I know how these things work out. But seeing them come to fruition and build to a head over the course of 90 minutes it was just so good. It is not as good as American Werewolf in London or Possession, obviously, because those are like high art masterpieces of the genre and of the form. But if there's any movie of these 12 films that I've watched for this little marathon that I'm going to watch again, it will probably be this one first, because I was cackling like an idiot watching this movie. It is just such a delight of storytelling, of direction, of performance, and of effects. These mermaid tails are disgusting, and they look good. They are long and gross, and they don't move. They move like fishtails do, like actual fishtails, and it's just a delight, the little pieces of authenticity to the in-universe story and the in-universe lore that these filmmakers have brought to the table. There is just such an incredible dedication to its own insanity that is the sort of movie that I look for when I hear the words a horror musical film based on the original Hans Christian Andersen version of The Little Mermaid. If that sentence excites you as much as it excites me, you need to watch this movie right now. I am somewhat ashamed that it took me so long to get around to seeing it. But I am exceptionally happy that I did watch it. And whatever these filmmakers do next, I know the director is said to be working on a science fiction opera set to David Bowie music, which is another perfect sentence. I cannot wait. It's going to be a blast, and I believe that the Lure has a Criterion release out, and I plan on picking it up very, very soon. So as a double feature, Phantom of the Paradise and the Lure make a pretty good double. If your tastes are as bizarre and as specific as mine, then do yourself a favor and watch these two very, very strange, very campy movies, because they're a blast. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Davey Peppers, and as always, if you would be so kind as to leave us a review, it helps us out a great deal, it gets us more exposure, and if you could follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that means the world to us as well. Thank you so much, stay spooky, and sing a little song for us all. Good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.